Assalamualaikum. This is Mushammad Mahmoud Akhtar. Welcome to my video. Today I will discuss about public IP address versus private IP address and also discuss NAT. This means Network Address Translation. Firstly, I will discuss about the difference between public IP address versus private IP address. The definition of private IP address. Private IP address used within a local networks, not accessible directly from the internet. That is say, private IP addresses are commonly used for local area networks in residential, office and enterprise area. Every device that connects to an internet network, such as computers, smartphones, tablets or printers. The purpose of private IP address. Now I said the purpose of private IP address facilitates communication between devices in a private networks. Routers need a way to identify this device and may also need to identify each other, which is where private IP addresses come in. Private IP addresses are generated by a router for identification. The range of private IP address for three classes, class A, class B and class C. For class A, from IP address 10.0.0.0 to subnet max 255, 255, 255, 10. Then for class B, from IP address 172.16.0.0 to subnet max 255, 255, 172, 32. And then for class C, from IP address 192.168.0.0 to subnet max 255, 255, 168.192. Then public IP address. The definition of public IP address differentiate the devices that are plugged into the public internet. Each device that accesses the internet uses a unique IP address. A public IP address is sometimes called an internet, and the purpose of private and public IP address. A public IP address is defined as a unique numerical value that is assigned to a particular device connected in the network that makes use of Internet Protocol for communication and transmission. The example of public IP address are web servers and email servers. Here is the diagram of public versus private IP address. Now we will learn what is public versus private IP address. And in the diagram, an attempt is made to explain what is private IP address and public IP address through some IP addressing. In next slide, we will see what is difference between public versus private. Here is the difference between private IP address versus public IP address. Private IP address, the scope of private IP address is local. On the other hand, the scope of public IP is global. Private IP address used to communicate within the network, and on the other hand, public IP address used to communicate outside the network. Private IP addresses of the systems connected in a network differ in a uniform manner, and public IP may differ in a uniform or non-uniform both of manner. Private IP address works only on LAN. On the other hand, public IP address used to get internet service. Private IP address used to load the network operating systems, and public IP address is controlled by ISP. This means Internet Service Providers. Private IP address available free of cost, and public IP address is not free of cost. Private IP can be known by entering ipconfig on the command prompt, and public IP can be known by searching what is my IP on Google. So finally, we done about the difference of public IP address versus private IP address. Now I will discuss about the NAT. This means Network Address Translation. Network Address Translation is used in routers, and it translates a set of IP addresses to another set of IP address. NAT helps preserve the limited amount of IP before public IP address. Engineers develop private IP address and network address translation. One public IP address is needed to access the internet, but we can use a private IP address in our private network. The idea of network address translation is to allow multiple devices to access the internet through a single public address. To achieve this, a private IP address must be translated into a public IP address. Here we see the diagram of network address translation table. So, this diagram, there are basically two functions. One is local network with private IP address and the other is global network with public IP address. A local network with private IP addresses is a setup where devices are connected within a network and are assigned IP addresses that are not routable on the public internet. These addresses are part of specific range designated by the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority for private use. They are widely used in LANs, local area networks, and rely on a router to connect to the internet via a public IP address. Then, the global network with public IP address. A global network with public IP address refers to a network infrastructure where devices are assigned IP addresses that are directly accessible from the internet. Those addresses allow devices to communicate across the global internet without requiring network address translation. Now we will discuss about the types of network address translation. Mainly the network address translations are three types: static net, dynamic net, and port address translation net. Static net maps a specific private IP address to a specific public IP address on a one-to-one basis. And this use case commonly used for devices that need to accessible from the internet, such as a web server or a VoIP system. The example of network address translation static net, private IP is 192.168.1.10 and the public IP for static net is 203.0.113.5. Second, the dynamic net maps a private IP address to a public IP address from a pool of public IPs on a first come, first served basis. And the use case of dynamic net is useful when you have multiple public IP addresses and want to dynamically assign that to device needing internet access. The example of dynamic network address translation pool of public IPs 203.0.113.5 to 203.0.113.10 and private devices are assigned public IPs or the internet private service dynamically as needed. The third, port address translation for network address translation, also known as network address translation overload. It maps multiple private IP addresses to a single public IP address, using different ports to differentiate between connections. And this use case is the most common type of network address translation in home and small office networks, allowing many devices to share a public and single public IP. The example of port address translation is 192.168.1.10 and maps to 203.0.113.5. Here is the diagram of network address translation. Now we discuss about the advantage and disadvantage of network address translation. The advantage of network address translations are: network address translation conserves legally registered IP address. It provides privacy as the device IP address. Sending and receiving the traffic will be hidden. Eliminates address renumbering when a network evolves. Then the disadvantage of network address translation. Translation results in switching path delays. Certain applications will not function while NAT is enabled. Complicates tunneling protocols such as IPsec. Also, the router, being a network layer device, should not tamper with port numbers, but it has to do so because of network address translation. Thank you, everyone.